pharmacy is open, and it has some stories for you. Silence your surroundings. What you are about to hear is more than just a story, so let the fear find its home, and don't forget to subscribe. Story 1. The Girl in the White Dress.
My name is Arthur, and I am an old man now. My hands tremble. My memories are a cluttered attic of forgotten rooms and faces. But there is one memory, one night from 60 years ago, that remains as clear and sharp as a shard of glass in my mind. It is the memory of a ghost. Not a story I heard, not a legend I was told. The ghost I picked up on the side of the road in my brand new 1965 Ford Mustang. It was October, the autumn of my 20th year. The world was a promise then, and I was its king. The car was my kingdom. A beast of midnight blue steel and roaring horsepower that I had worked 2 summers to afford. That night, I was driving home from the city, having dropped off a girl I was trying to impress. The drive was long, taking me along the old Archer road that curved around the edge of the lake. A lonely stretch of asphalt that cut through miles of dark woods and old cemeteries. The hour was late, well past midnight. The radio was playing a soft, crackling tune, and the world was quiet. I was feeling good, confident, the king of my own small universe. And then I saw her. Up ahead, caught in the cone of my headlights, a figure was walking along the shoulder of the road. It was a girl. She was wearing a brilliant white dress, a formal ball gown that seemed to glow in the darkness. It was the most out-of-place thing you could imagine, a debutante walking through the dead of night on a road that led to nowhere. She wasn't hitchhiking. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She was just walking, her steps slow and graceful, her head slightly bowed. My first thought was that she was in trouble. A car must have broken down, or she'd had a fight with her date. A girl like that, alone out here, it wasn't right. I slowed the Mustang down, the engine rumbling, and pulled up alongside her. I rolled down the passenger window. "Evening, miss," I said, trying to sound like the smoothest man alive. "Everything all right?" "You look a little lost." She stopped and turned to look at me, and my breath caught in my throat. She was beautiful, but it was a strange, tragic kind of beauty. Her skin was pale, almost luminous in the dashboard lights, and her eyes were large and dark and full of a sadness so profound, it felt like a physical weight. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, as if she had just stepped out of a ballroom. "I need to get home," she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper, barely louder than the idling engine. "I'm so very late." A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air crawled over my skin. I noticed then that her dress, while beautiful, was slightly torn at the hem, and there was a faint smudge of what looked like dirt on her sleeve. "Well, hop in," I said, pushing the passenger door open for her. "It's no night for a lady to be walking. Tell me where you need to go." She gave me a small, grateful smile that didn't touch the sadness in her eyes, and slid into the vinyl passenger seat. As she settled in, a wave of intense, bone-deep cold filled the car. It was as if she had brought the grave's chill in with her. I shivered, chalking it up to the open door, and pulled back onto the road. "My name's Arthur," I said, trying to fill the sudden heavy silence. "Mary," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The conversation was stilted, strange. I asked her where she had been, and she just said, "Dancing." I asked her if she lived nearby, and she gave me an address on a street in a quiet, residential neighborhood about 5 miles away. Every answer was short, polite, and tinged with that unshakable melancholy. The cold in the car intensified. I had to turn the heat on, but it did nothing to fight the chill that was emanating from her side of the car. I noticed her breath wasn't fogging the cold windshield. I tried one last time. "That's a beautiful dress," I said. She looked down at it, a flicker of something, maybe pain in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I wore it to a very special dance." We drove the rest of the way in silence. I was no longer a confident king in my castle. I was a nervous young man, completely unnerved by the strange, sad girl beside me. I was relieved when I finally turned onto her street. It was a normal, peaceful suburban lane, lined with dark sleeping houses. I pulled up to the address she had given me. It was a well-kept brick house with a neat lawn and a welcoming porch light. "Here we are," I said, turning to her with a smile I didn't feel, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the house with an expression of intense, heartbreaking longing. A single perfect tear rolled down her pale cheek. "Thank you, Arthur," she whispered, her voice full of a sorrow that felt ancient. "You've been very kind." Determined to be a gentleman to the very end, I cut the engine and got out. "I'll get the door for you," I said, walking around the front of the car. The night was quiet, the only sound the chirping of crickets. I reached her side of the car and pulled the heavy door open. The passenger seat was empty. I stared, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. The seat where she had been sitting just seconds before was completely vacant. The seatbelt was still buckled. The door had been locked. I had heard the click myself. There was no sound of her running off, no sign of movement anywhere on the quiet street. She had just vanished. And on the empty vinyl seat, the only proof she had ever been there was a small, damp, cold spot and a single fallen petal from a white rose. My mind simply refused to accept it. A trick. It had to be a trick. I slammed the passenger door shut and ran a frantic circle around the Mustang, my eyes scanning the manicured lawns and the dark, sleeping houses. "Mary," I called out, my voice a harsh whisper in the crushing silence of the suburban night. "This isn't funny." There was no answer. The street was empty, a perfect picture of peaceful slumber. There was nowhere she could have gone. I checked the back seat of the car, a space barely big enough for a bag of groceries. Empty. I ran my hand over the passenger seat. The vinyl was unnaturally cold, a patch of deep winter in the mild autumn air. My fingers brushed against the single, delicate rose petal. It was real. She was real. I couldn't just leave. What if she was hurt? What if she was hiding, playing? Some kind of bizarre prank? My sense of youthful bravado was gone, replaced by a churning mixture of fear and a strange, lingering sense of responsibility. I had brought her here. I couldn't just drive away. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the neat flagstone path to the front door of the brick house. The porch light cast a warm, welcoming glow that felt like a lie. I raised my hand and knocked, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet street. After a long moment, a light came on inside, and the door opened a few inches. An older man, maybe in his 50s, peered out at me. He was in his pajamas, his face etched with sleep and a wary annoyance. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gruff. "It's the middle of the night." The words tumbled out of me, clumsy and insane. "Sir, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know how this sounds, but I just gave your daughter a ride home. A girl named Mary. She was wearing a white dress walking along Archer Road and..." The man's face changed. The annoyance didn't turn to anger. It collapsed, crumbling into an expression of profound, soul-deep weariness, a sadness so heavy it seemed to physically stoop his shoulders. He had heard this before. "You'd better come inside, son," he said, his voice now just a tired sigh. He opened the door and led me into a living room that was a perfect time capsule. The furniture, the pictures on the wall, it all felt warm and lived in. An older woman, the mother, came down the stairs, tying a robe around her waist. She saw me, then looked at her husband's face, and her own expression fell into the same mask of familiar sorrow. "Another one, dear?" she asked softly. My heart was pounding. I didn't understand. The man pointed to a collection of silver-framed photographs on the mantelpiece. In the center was a large professional portrait of a beautiful blonde girl in a formal white ball gown, her smile bright and full of life. It was her. It was Mary. "That's my daughter," the man said, his voice thick with an old, weathered grief. "That's our Mary." "Where is she?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She was in my car, and then she was gone." The mother began to cry softly, a sound she had clearly made 1,000 times before. "Our Mary," the the father said, looking at the photograph and not at me, was on her way home from a dance at the O'Henry Ballroom. She was wearing that dress. She and her young man had an argument, and she tried to walk home along Archer Road. He paused, taking a shaky breath. A hit-and-run driver. They never caught him. He struck her and left her on the side of the road. That was 10 years ago, October of 1955. The air left my lungs. The room seemed to tilt. 10 years. You're not the first, son, the father continued, his voice hollow. Every year around this time, someone like you, a kind soul driving alone, sees her. You're one of many. You all say the same thing. She's walking, she's sad, she just wants to come home. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible pity. She never quite makes it all the way. Sometimes she vanishes at the cemetery gates. Sometimes right out front like tonight. Thank you for trying to bring our girl home. I don't remember leaving the house. I stumbled back to my car in a daze, the world no longer making sense. The laws of reality had been repealed. I was no longer a king in his castle. I was just a terrified boy who had given a ride to a ghost. I got in the Mustang, the engine turning over with a roar that sounded alien and intrusive in the quiet grief of that street. I just wanted to go home, to hide in my bed and pretend this night never happened. I pulled away from the curb, my mind a swirling chaos of impossible truths. As I drove, I noticed the cold hadn't left the car. It was no longer just the passenger seat. The entire cab was freezing, a deep, penetrating chill that the heater couldn't touch. I glanced up at my rearview mirror, expecting to see my own wide, terrified eyes. But for a split second, reflected in the dark glass, I saw her. She was in the back seat, her pale face and sad eyes looking directly at me. I blinked, and the image was gone. There was only the empty road behind me, but I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than fear, that I was not alone in the car. The ride wasn't over, and I had a horrifying feeling that for me it never would be. I drove the rest of the way home in a state of cold, silent terror. The chill in the car was no longer a mystery, it was a presence. It was her. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again, but I could feel her there. I could feel her sadness, a weight so immense it seemed to press down on the very frame of the car, making the engine labor. The radio had gone silent, replaced by a faint, almost inaudible whispering, like the rustle of a silk dress. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the familiar sight of my house did nothing to comfort me. I cut the engine, and in the sudden silence I heard a clear, soft whisper from the back seat. "Thank you." I scrambled out of the car, slamming the door, and didn't look back. I ran inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, my body shaking uncontrollably. For the first time since I was a child, I was afraid of the dark. The haunting did not end that night. It was subtle, quiet, a haunting of the senses. The passenger seat of my beloved Mustang remained forever cold, a patch of permanent winter that no amount of summer sun could warm. Sometimes, when driving alone, I would catch the faint, sweet scent of roses in the car, and late at night, when the house was quiet, I would sometimes hear it from the garage below, a soft, heartbroken whisper carried on the drafts. My name, Arthur. I tried to live my life. I grew up, I went to college, got a job, got married, but she was always there, a ghost at the edge of my vision, a cold spot in an otherwise warm room. My wife would sometimes ask me why I stared off into the distance, my eyes full of a sadness I could never explain. How could I tell her I was sharing my life with the memory of a dead girl? How could I explain that on certain nights in October, I would wake up shivering, not from the cold in the room, but from the memory of the cold that had settled into my soul 60 years ago? But the true horror, the true weight of the curse she left me with, did not reveal itself until a year later. It was the anniversary of the night I met her. I had tried to forget the date, but it was burned into my mind. As evening fell, a strange, irresistible compulsion came over me. I found myself grabbing the keys to the Mustang, my movements not entirely my own. My wife asked where I was going. I couldn't answer her. I had to drive. I found myself back on Archer Road, the dark woods and silent cemeteries passing by my window like old, forgotten friends. And as I rounded the familiar curve by the lake, I saw her. Up ahead, caught in the cone of my headlights, a figure was walking. A girl in a brilliant white dress, her head slightly bowed. My body went cold with a dread that was now horribly familiar. I tried to keep driving, to speed past her, to break the cycle, but my foot, against my will, moved from the accelerator to the brake. The Mustang slowed, its engine rumbling, and pulled up alongside her. My hand, guided by a force I could not fight, reached over and rolled down the passenger window. I heard my own voice, a stranger's voice, young and confident, say the words I had said a lifetime ago. "Evening, miss. Everything all right?" She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with the same infinite tragic sadness. And I understood. This was my purgatory. I wasn't just one of the many who had seen her. I was the one she had chosen. The parents had been wrong. She wasn't just trying to get home. She was trying to finish her dance. And I was now her eternal partner. So here I am, an old man waiting for October. And soon I will feel the pull again. I will get in my car, though it is no longer a Mustang, but a sensible sedan, and I will drive out to that lonely road, and I will pick her up. We will have the same quiet conversation, and I will take her to the house where her parents no longer live, and she will vanish, and I will be left for one more year with the cold, the silence, and the ghost of a girl in a white dress, forever riding in my passenger seat.
Story 2. The call from inside the house.
My name is Laura, and the woman I am today was forged in the terror of a single night in 1986. I was 16 years old, more interested in pop music and hairspray than in any real danger. Babysitting was just an easy way to make cash for the movies. The job that night was for the Millers, a doctor and his wife who lived in a sprawling modern house at the end of a long wooded cul-de-sac. It was my first time sitting for them. Mrs. Miller was a whirlwind of perfume and instructions. "The kids, Josh and Chloe, are already asleep," she said, pointing up a grand carpeted staircase. "They're heavy sleepers, so you won't hear a peep from them. Honestly, the best thing you can do is just stay down here, watch TV, and don't worry about a thing. Please don't go upstairs. We don't want them disturbed," her husband nodded, smiling. "We'll be back late, around midnight. The number for the restaurant is on the fridge. Make yourself at home." And then they were gone, their car's taillights vanishing down the long, dark driveway. The heavy front door clicked shut, and the house fell into a profound silence. It was the kind of quiet that only exists in a house that's too big for the people inside it. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, seemed amplified, unnatural. I locked the deadbolt, a shiver running down my spine that I dismissed as foolishness. I tried to relax. I raided their pantry for snacks, settled onto a plush leather couch, and turned on the television. An hour passed. The house was still, silent except for the canned laughter from the TV show I was watching. Then the phone rang. The sound was jarring, a shrill tear in the fabric of the quiet. I picked up the receiver in the kitchen. "Miller Residence," I said, trying to sound professional. There was nothing on the other end, just the faint, empty hiss of an open line. And then I heard it, a sound that was not a sound, a slow, steady, guttural breathing, a wet, heavy sound, like someone with fluid in their lungs was holding the phone right up to their mouth. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. The breathing just continued for another 10 seconds, and then the line went dead with a click. I hung up the phone, my heart starting to beat a little faster. A prank call, that's all it was. Just some local kids dialing random numbers. I went back to the couch, but the humor was gone from the show I was watching. My eyes kept darting towards the large, dark windows, towards the shadowy hallway that led to the rest of the house. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. My hand shook as I picked it up. "Hello?" This time a voice answered. It was a man. His voice a low, raspy whisper that sounded like gravel being scraped across concrete. "Have you checked the children?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. The world seemed to shrink to just the phone in my hand and the voice on the other end. This wasn't a random prank. He knew I was a babysitter. He knew there were children. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice a pathetic squeak. The man just chuckled, a horrible, dry, rattling sound, and hung up. Now, I was terrified. This was real. I ran through the downstairs, checking every window and door, making sure they were locked. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? What would I tell them? That someone was playing a prank? They'd laugh at me. Should I call the parents? I didn't want to ruin their night over nothing. And then Mrs. Miller's words came back to me. "Please don't go upstairs." I was caught in a horrible dilemma. Was the man's question a simple taunt? Or was it a genuine threat? Were the children okay? The phone rang a third time, its shriek making me scream out loud. I stared at it, my body frozen in a state of pure indecision. I had to answer it. I had to know. I snatched the receiver. "Leave us alone," I yelled into it. The raspy voice whispered back, a note of amusement in its tone. "You're all alone." "But you're not alone in there. I'm watching you." That was it. I slammed the phone down and immediately picked it back up, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 0 for the operator. A calm, professional woman's voice answered. "Operator, how may I help you?" The words poured out of me in a frantic, sobbing torrent. I told her about the calls, about the man, about the children upstairs. "Okay, honey, stay calm," the operator said, her voice a lifeline. "I can trace the call, but you need to keep him on the line for at least 1 full minute. Can you do that? The next time he calls, talk to him, ask him questions. Just keep him talking." As if on cue, the line clicked. "Call waiting." He was calling again. My blood turned to ice. With the operator listening in on the other line, I took a shaky breath and clicked over. "What do you want?" I whispered. "I want to see what your blood looks like," the man rasped, puddled on the pretty white carpet. The operator's voice suddenly cut in, no longer calm but sharp and full of a terror that mirrored my own. "Get out of the house," she screamed. "We've traced the call. It's coming from the telephone on the 2nd floor. He's inside the house." "He's inside the house." The operator's scream was a death sentence delivered over the phone. For a single frozen moment, the world ceased to exist. There was only her voice, the frantic beating of my own heart, and the horrifying absolute certainty that I was in a cage with a monster. I didn't hang up the phone, I dropped it. The receiver crashed against the floor, the operator's voice now a tiny, tinny plea from a world away. I didn't listen. I ran. My only thought was the front door. I scrambled across the slick marble of the foyer, my sneakers slipping, my hands outstretched for the heavy oak panel that was my only escape. I reached the deadbolt, the small brass knob a beacon of hope, and twisted it. It didn't budge. It was the kind of lock that required a key to open from the inside. A security feature, Mrs. Miller had called it. A tombstone, my mind shrieked. The key. Where was the key? On a hook in the kitchen? In a bowl on the hall table? I had no idea. My frantic eyes scanned the entryway, but in the dim light, everything was just shapes and shadows. And then I heard it. From the top of the grand staircase, a single, slow, deliberate creak, the sound of a heavy foot settling on an old wooden stair. He knew I knew. The game was over. The hunt had begun. My breath hitched in my throat. I backed away from the door, my eyes locked on the shadowy top of the stairs. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then another sound. A soft final click from the kitchen phone as he hung it up. He was off the line. He was free to move. Another creak from the stairs, this one closer. He was coming down. I turned and fled, not screaming, just moving, a silent mouse darting away from the shadow of a hawk. I ran through the living room and into a dark study I remembered from the tour, Dr. Miller's office. I slipped inside, closing the heavy door as gently as I could, my fingers fumbling for the lock. The click of the bolt sliding home was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The room was dark, smelling of leather and old paper. The only light was the faint moonlight filtering through the large bay window behind a massive mahogany desk. I dove under the desk, curling myself into the smallest possible ball in the deep knee hole, my back pressed against the wall. I pulled my knees to my chest, covered my mouth with my hands to muffle my own ragged breathing, and I listened. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Thud, 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 slow and heavy on the hardwood floor of the foyer. I could hear him moving through the downstairs, his pace unhurried, casual. He was exploring his domain. He knew I was trapped. There was no rush. I could hear the floorboards groaning in the living room, just outside the office. He was getting closer. My entire body was a single clenched muscle of terror. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if not seeing him would make me invisible. The footsteps stopped, right outside the office door. Silence. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Then, the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, silently at first, then rattling violently as it met the resistance of the lock. He shook it once, twice, a test of strength. A low, frustrated growl echoed from the other side, and then it stopped. I waited, my body trembling, every nerve ending screaming. Had he given up? Was he going to another room? A new sound began. A soft, rhythmic scratching on the wood of the door, like a dog wanting to be let in. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It went on for a full minute, a sound designed to shred my sanity, and then it stopped too. A new, profound silence fell over the house. I stayed curled under the desk, not daring to move, listening. A minute passed, then two. Maybe he was gone. Maybe the police were on their way. A tiny, fragile sliver of hope began to bloom in my chest. That's when I heard the sound from the wall behind me. It was a faint, gritty, scraping noise. Not on the door. It was coming from inside the wall that the desk was pushed against, the wall that connected the office to the main living room. It was the sound of something sharp, dragging slowly across the drywall on the other side. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't trying to get through the door. He was coming through the wall. The scraping sound concentrated in one spot, right behind my head. It became more insistent, a grinding, twisting noise. I was too terrified to move. A trapped animal listening to the hunter dig its way into its burrow. With a final, sharp crack, the tip of a butcher knife pierced through the drywall, not 6 inches from my face. It was followed by a puff of white plaster dust. The blade twisted, widening the hole, and then it was gone, leaving a jagged, dark opening. I stared at the hole, mesmerized by horror, and from that dark opening, I heard his raspy, guttural whisper, no longer filtered through a phone line, but right there, in the room with me. I see you. I see you. That whisper, so close, so real, shattered the paralysis. It was a catalyst of pure terror, a jolt of adrenaline that shot through my veins and screamed a single, undeniable command. Move. I didn't think. I reacted. I scrambled out from under the desk on the opposite side, just as a hand, clutching the handle of the butcher knife, punched through the crumbling drywall. I didn't see the man, only the weapon, a dark and brutal silhouette against the faint light of the living room. He started carving the wall, sawing through the plaster in frantic, jagged strokes, trying to widen the hole. I was on my feet, my back pressed against the cold glass of the large bay window. My mind was a whirlwind of pure static, but my eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, a weapon, anything. The heavy oak door was a death sentence. The hole in the wall was the mouth of the grave. Only the window remained. I fumbled behind me, my trembling fingers searching for the latch. It was an old, heavy brass lock, stiff from disuse. As I struggled with it, the sound from the wall changed. The sawing stopped. A heavy, frustrated grunt echoed from the other side, followed by a tremendous crash as he threw his shoulder against the office door. The wood splintered, the frame groaning in protest. He was coming through the door now. My fingers finally found the purchase they needed. The lock gave way with a loud click. At the same moment, the door flew open, torn from its hinges, and he was there. I only saw him for a second, but that second is burned into my memory for eternity. He was just a man, tall and gaunt, his face a pale, emotionless mask. But his eyes were black pits of absolute emptiness, a void of anything human. There was no anger, no madness, just a dead, predatory focus, and he was looking right at me. He lunged. Time seemed to slow down. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed the heaviest thing on the desk, a solid glass paperweight, and hurled it at him with all the strength I had. It struck him in the side of the head with a sickening thud. He grunted, stumbling for a single, crucial second. It was all the time I needed. I spun around, threw open the window, and jumped. I fell through the darkness, crashing hard into the thick, manicured bushes below. A sharp, searing pain shot up my ankle, but I barely felt it. I scrambled out of the foliage, my body screaming, and I ran. I ran across the wet, perfect lawn, not looking back, my lungs on fire. I ran out into the street, a wild, sobbing creature under the cold, silent moon. And then I saw them. The frantic, flashing red and blue lights of a police car appearing at the end of the long, wooded cul-de-sac. Then another. They were coming. The operator had saved me. I collapsed onto the cold, wet asphalt as the first car screeched to a halt beside me, my conscious mind finally letting go, surrendering to the blessed release of shock. The rest is a blur of fragmented memories. Blankets. The faces of concerned police officers. An ambulance. They told me later what they found. They found the children upstairs in their beds. They had been murdered before their parents had even left the house. The man had been in the house the entire time, waiting, playing with me. But they never found him. He had vanished. When they swarmed the house, he was gone. No fingerprints, no witnesses other than a hysterical 16-year-old girl. He was a ghost, a phantom who had slipped into a quiet suburban home and turned it into a slaughterhouse, only to disappear back into the night. I grew up. I tried to move on, but that night became the foundation upon which the rest of my life was built. Every silent house holds a potential monster. Every dark hallway is a hunting ground. Every ringing phone is a potential threat. I live in a fortress now, a modern home with alarms and cameras, a place where I control every lock and every shadow. I have a family of my own, children I watch over with a fierce, paranoid love that they will never understand. I have built a life on top of my fear. For 30 years, the silence was just silence. He was a memory, a nightmare I relived, but a memory nonetheless. Until last week. I was home alone, reading in the quiet of the evening. My cell phone, my safe, modern connection to the world, rang on the table beside me. The screen read blocked number. A cold, familiar dread washed over me, a ghost from a past I had tried so hard to bury. It's just a telemarketer, I told myself. It's nothing. I answered the call. For a long moment, there was only the faint digital hiss of an open line. And then I heard it. A sound I had heard every night in my nightmares for 3 decades. A slow, steady, guttural breathing. My blood turned to ice. My hand trembled, about to end the call, to shatter the connection. But before I could, the raspy voice, older now, but unmistakably his, whispered into my ear. I've been waiting for the children to be asleep. For the children to be asleep.
Story 3. Don't turn on the light.
My name is Chris. When you go away to college, they tell you your dorm room will be your new home, and your roommate will be your new family. For my freshman year, that was actually true. My roommate, Matt, wasn't just a randomly assigned person. He became my brother. We shared everything: video games, secrets, late-night pizzas, and our plans for the future. Our room, a cramped little box on the 3rd floor of Blackwood Hall, was our sanctuary, the one safe place in the overwhelming new world of university life. The night it happened was a Thursday. There was a big party at one of the frat houses off campus. I was a quiet, studious type, but Matt, with his relentless energy, wouldn't let me sit it out. "Come on, Chris," he'd said, his voice raspy. "You can't spend every night with your books. You have to live a little." He was sick with a nasty head cold and couldn't go himself, but he insisted I go for both of us. He was buried under a pile of blankets on his bed, looking miserable. His last words to me were, "Just be quiet when you come back, man. I'm going to try and sleep this thing off." The party was exactly what you'd expect. Loud music, cheap beer, and crowded rooms. I stayed for a few hours, feeling awkward and out of place, before deciding to call it a night. It was late, probably around 2 a.m. when I walked back to the dorm. The campus was quiet and dark, the old academic buildings looking like sleeping giants under the moonlight. I let myself into our room as quietly as I could, using the dim light from the hallway to navigate. The room was pitch black. Matt, true to his word, was fast asleep. I didn't want to wake him, so I decided not to turn on the main overhead light. I closed the door gently, plunging the room into near total darkness. My eyes slowly adjusted. I could just make out the lump of his form in his bed across the small room. I started to get ready for bed, moving as silently as a mouse. As I was pulling off my shoes, I heard a sound from his side of the room. A soft, wet, whimpering sound, like someone trying to cry in their sleep. Poor Matt, I thought.
That cold sounds brutal. I felt a pang of guilt for being out while he was sick. The whimpering continued for a few moments and then faded. I changed into my shorts in the dark, the silence of the room feeling heavy and thick. I was just about to climb into my own bed when I heard another sound. A scratch. It was a strange, rhythmic noise. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded like fingernails, dragging slowly across the wooden floorboards near Matt's desk. My first thought was that he was tossing and turning, maybe kicking something in his sleep. The sound was unsettling, but I was tired and my mind was fuzzy. I didn't want to be a bad roommate and wake him up by turning on the light to investigate a weird noise. I told myself to just go to sleep. I climbed into my bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and closed my eyes. The scratching sound continued for another minute before finally stopping. The room was silent again, except for Matt's soft, steady breathing, or what I thought was his breathing. As I lay there on the edge of sleep, I realized it wasn't quite right. It was too shallow, too raspy, and there was a strange, wet, gurgling quality to it, a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I told myself it was his congestion, his head cold. I forced myself to ignore it. I just wanted to sleep. I must have been drifting off because the next sound made me jolt awake, my heart seizing in my chest. It was a whisper, and it came from the floor, right next to my bed. It was a low, guttural voice, a voice that was definitely not Matt's, a man's voice, and it whispered two horrifying words: "He's awake. He's awake." The world stopped. Those two words, spoken in a voice that was utterly alien to the sanctuary of our room, were a key turning a lock in my mind, trapping me in a state of pure, cold paralysis. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I didn't dare breathe. I didn't dare move. My eyes were squeezed shut, but the image of the dark room was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. My mind, a frantic animal in a cage, tried to find an escape. It was a dream. You're half asleep, you imagined it. It was the TV from the room next door. But the whisper hadn't come from the wall. It had come from the floor, right beside me, a place of empty air where nothing should have been. He's awake. It was a statement of fact. A predator, acknowledging its prey, had just stirred. Then a new sound. A soft, dragging shuffle from the center of the room. It was the sound of heavy, wet fabric being pulled slowly across the floorboards. It was moving from Matt's side of the room towards mine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the awful silence. I kept my breathing shallow, feigning sleep, praying that whatever was in the room with me would believe the lie, would lose interest and go away. The shuffling stopped. It was close now. So close I could feel a change in the air pressure beside my bed. The strange, wet, gurgling breathing started again. No longer a distant sound from across the room, but a present, intimate horror right next to my ear. It was the sound of a struggle, of lungs fighting for air that was thick with fluid. Was it Matt? Had he gotten out of bed? Was he sick, choking? Every decent instinct I had screamed at me to turn on the lamp to help my friend. But the guttural whisper had not been Matt's voice. And a deeper, more ancient instinct, the one that tells the rabbit to stay frozen in the shadow of the hawk, held me in its icy grip. Turning on the light felt like an admission that I was awake, an admission that I knew something was there, and I was terrified of what would happen after that. I stayed completely still, a statue carved from fear, for what felt like an eternity. The wet breathing sound moved, circling my bed slowly. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards as it shifted its weight. It was inspecting me, judging me. Then the breathing stopped. The scratching started again, but this time it wasn't on the floor. It was on the wooden leg of my bed frame, a slow, deliberate clawing that vibrated up through the mattress and into my bones. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was testing the cage. I risked it. I opened my eyes, just a crack, a sliver of vision into the oppressive darkness. The room was a mess of gray shapes and deep shadows. I could see the outline of my desk, the silhouette of the chair, the faint rectangle of the window. I could see nothing moving. The scratching stopped. An absolute terrifying silence descended upon the room once more. I waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. My body ached from the tension. Maybe it was over. Maybe it had gone, convinced I was asleep. My rational mind started to claw its way back. It had all been a hallucination, a vivid dream brought on by exhaustion and cheap beer. It had to be. That's when I felt it. The mattress dipped. It was a slow, deliberate compression at the foot of my bed, near my ankles. The distinct, undeniable feeling of a heavy weight settling onto the edge of the mattress, as if someone had just sat down. I didn't need to open my eyes. I knew it was on my bed with me. I could feel the sheer presence of it, a void of warmth and safety in my small sanctuary. I was no longer alone in my bed. I lay there, every muscle screaming, my mind fractured into a million pieces of terror. I thought that was the peak, the absolute summit of fear. I was wrong. The true horror had not yet begun. Because then, I felt something else. It started at my ankle, over the thin fabric of my blanket. The slow, cold, dragging sensation of a single sharp point, a fingernail, tracing a deliberate, curious line up the length of my shin, over my knee and onto my thigh. And it was not stopping. And it was not stopping. The fingernail was a shard of ice, a dead, unfeeling point of contact that traced a path of pure terror up my leg. My mind, which had been a screaming chaos just moments before, went utterly and completely silent. Every function of my body, every thought, was focused on that single moving point. It moved with a slow, deliberate pressure, an explorer charting a new continent of fear. It passed my knee, its cold trail burning through the thin blanket, and started its journey up my thigh. It was not going to stop. That single absolute certainty broke the spell. The frozen terror shattered and was replaced by a volcanic eruption of pure, primal adrenaline. I did not make a plan. I did not think. I exploded. With a guttural roar that was more animal than human, I kicked out with my other leg, aiming for the heavy weight at the foot of my bed. My foot connected with something solid, something that felt horribly like a human torso. At the same instant, I threw myself sideways, scrambling off the bed and away from the touch, my limbs flailing in the darkness. My arm swept across my nightstand, sending my lamp, my alarm clock, and a glass of water crashing to the floor. For a single blinding eternity, the world turned white. The lamp bulb shattered on the floor, but its filament, in its final incandescent death throe, flashed with the intensity of a lightning strike. The room was illuminated in a perfect, horrible, stop-motion photograph. And I saw everything. I saw Matt. He was in his bed, but he wasn't sleeping. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling with a look of silent, frozen horror. His throat had been cut, a single, deep black line in the monochrome flash. The sheets beneath him were a dark, glistening sea of black. And I saw the man. He was crouched at the foot of my bed, thrown off balance by my kick. He was gaunt, emaciated, his clothes little more than dark, filthy rags. His face was a mask of feral insanity, his lips pulled back in a silent snarl. His eyes, wide and black, were not looking at me. They were fixed on Matt's bed with a look of furious, possessive ownership, and in his hand, he clutched a shard of broken glass. The light died. The darkness crashed back in, absolute and complete. But the after-image, the tableau of absolute horror, was burned onto the back of my retinas. I didn't wait. I scrambled on all fours, my hands slipping in something wet on the floor. I found the door, fumbled with the knob, threw it open, and burst out into the sterile fluorescent brightness of the hallway. I didn't stop running, just screamed, a continuous wordless siren of pure terror as I sprinted down the empty corridor. The official story is the one you've heard. A transient, they said, had somehow gotten into the dorm. My roommate, Matt, had been the victim of a tragic random act of violence. The police found the words, his final taunting message to me, written in Matt's blood on the wall above my now empty bed. "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" The killer was never found. He had vanished from a third-floor dorm room, leaving no trace, no fingerprints, nothing but a dead body and a traumatized witness. I left that university. I left that state. I tried to leave that night behind me, but it became my shadow, a constant companion in the dark. I am a man who is haunted by a memory and by a profound soul-crushing guilt. I lay there, listening, while my best friend, my brother, was murdered just a few feet away from me. That knowledge is a prison I will never escape. My life since then has been a war against the darkness. I suffer from a crippling nyctophobia. I cannot sleep in a room that is not brightly lit. My apartment has no curtains, only blinds that are always open. I own a dozen nightlights, and I sleep with the television on, its flickering images a constant, comforting presence. For 20 years, I have not spent a single moment in true, absolute darkness. For 20 years, I've kept the monsters at bay with the simple power of electricity. Until last night. The storm that rolled through the city was brutal, and around 3 a.m. the entire neighborhood was plunged into a sudden, suffocating blackness. The power was out. My lights, my television, my fortress of artificial daylight, it was all gone. And I was alone in the kind of pitch-black darkness I had not experienced since I was 19 years old. I was paralyzed in my bed, just as I had been that night. The old, familiar terror, which had been a quiet hum for 2 decades, roared back to life. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, for a flashlight, anything, and in the absolute oppressive silence of my own apartment, I heard it. It came from the far corner of my bedroom, a slow, rhythmic, and horribly familiar scratching sound. He hadn't just been a random man. He was my boogeyman, and for 20 years, he has been waiting, patiently, in the shadows of my life, for the lights to finally go out.
That concludes today's transmission. Remember, the darker the night, the closer the demons watch. Until next time.